This happened a few years ago when I was 21. I remember the exact moment because it felt like a silent alarm went off inside my chest. It was 2 a.m., and the house was absolutely dead quiet. The kind of quiet where you can hear the hum of the fridge fighting the silence. My roommate, Mike, was upstairs, already asleep, probably drooling on his pillow, which was normal for him. I was downstairs in the living room, trying to force myself through a terrible documentary about deep-sea fish, really just waiting for my eyes to give up. Then my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, thinking it was just a random late-night ad. But when I picked it up, the screen lit up with a text message. It wasn't from Mike or from one of my buddies, or even my mom asking if I'd eaten vegetables recently. It was from someone I knew, but never really talked to, Sarah. Sarah was Mike's older sister. She was technically living in the house too, in the small attic room on the third floor that Mike always joked was haunted. She'd moved in a month ago, saying she needed a temporary place to crash while she figured out her next move. In the month she'd been here, I'd maybe exchanged 10 words with her. She was quiet, almost invisible, always wearing these huge headphones, and she worked nights as a bartender, so our paths rarely crossed. I saw her maybe once a week, usually just a quick nod in the hallway. The text message was just 5 words long. My stomach dropped like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. I read it twice, maybe 3 times, just to make sure my tired brain hadn't misfired. It said, "Come upstairs, but don't knock." I remember looking up from the phone, glancing toward the darkened staircase. What in the world was going on? My mind immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusions. Was she hurt? Was she trying to get out of the house because someone was after her? Sarah wasn't the kind of person who joked, especially not through a cryptic text message in the middle of the night. This was serious. This was urgent. The whole situation felt wrong. The house was a rental, a flimsy old place. The doors squeaked, the floorboards groaned, and Mike always slept like a ton of bricks. But still, the thought of sneaking past his room, past anyone's room, filled me with an instant, cold dread. Why the secrecy? Why couldn't she just come downstairs if she needed something? Or text Mike, her own brother? I hesitated. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to text back, "Is everything okay?" But I didn't. Something about the starkness of those 5 words told me that asking questions wasn't the move right now. It was a request, yes, but it felt more like an instruction. I put my phone in my pocket. I slowly, carefully stood up from the couch, making sure the old springs didn't scream. The silence in the house suddenly felt heavy, like wet concrete. I took 1 step toward the stairs, then another, the floorboards surprisingly holding their silence for a change. I was moving without thinking, driven by a fear that something was terribly wrong with Sarah. I got to the bottom of the staircase, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew I was about to walk into something I shouldn't, but I also knew I couldn't just sit there. I had to go up. I started my silent ascent up the first flight of stairs, wondering what I was going to find waiting for me at the top, and why those words felt less like a plea and more like a warning. I had to remind myself exactly who Sarah was. She wasn't just my roommate's older sister. She was a ghost in our shared life. Mike, bless his loud, messy heart, always introduced me as his only successful friend, and I'd been his roommate since college. We had that easy, established rhythm: video games, takeout menus, and mutual tolerance for each other's terrible habits. We were like brothers, and I knew everything about him, except maybe his family drama, which he kept locked up tight. Sarah was the drama. Before she moved in, Mike had given me the CliffsNotes version. She'd been living across the country, trying to make it as a graphic designer. She was apparently brilliant, but really struggled with the practical side of life, holding down a steady job, paying rent, that kind of stuff. She was always the difficult one in the family, the sensitive artistic type who saw the world in high definition while everyone else saw standard def. Mike adored her, you could tell, but he was also frustrated by her constant need for a fresh start. When she arrived, everything got quieter. She kept to herself in that cramped third-floor room. I'd overhear Mike sometimes, talking to her quietly in the kitchen late at night. They weren't fighting, but their conversations were always intense, hushed, and ended abruptly when I walked in. I got the distinct feeling that Sarah wasn't just crashing. She was hiding something. Not from the law or anything crazy, but maybe from her past, or maybe even from herself. Our relationship was non-existent. She would nod, I would nod. She always smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and some expensive, musky perfume. She had these huge, dark, expressive eyes that seemed to be watching everything but engaging with nothing. Mike had warned me, half jokingly, "Just leave her alone, man. She's focused right now. Don't bother the artist." So I hadn't. Now, standing on the landing between the first and second floor, the air felt suddenly cold. I looked up. Mike's room was right there, the door slightly ajar. I could hear his low, steady snoring, a sound that was usually comforting, now felt like a terrible liability. If I woke him up, how would I explain this? "Sorry, Mike, your sister who never talks to me just texted me at 2 a.m. to come sneak into the attic." No. That was an immediate red flag, a giant neon sign pointing to trouble. I had to be absolutely silent. I tiptoed past Mike's door, holding my breath. I felt a crazy surge of adrenaline, not because I was afraid of Mike, but because the need for secrecy Sarah had imposed felt so powerful. She hadn't said, "Don't wake Mike." She said, "Don't knock." It was about more than just noise. The final flight of stairs to the attic was narrower, steeper, and mercifully covered in old, thin carpet, muffling my steps. I could see the glow of light filtering from under the attic door, Sarah's room. It was faint, a pale yellow line on the dark floor. I was only a few steps away from finding out why she needed me, not Mike, and why it had to be in total silence. What kind of trouble was I walking into? I paused right outside the door, my hand raised, feeling the cold, smooth wood. I still hadn't heard a sound from inside. The silence was heavier than ever, punctuated only by my own ragged breathing. I wondered if I should just turn around and pretend this never happened. But the image of her face, those dark, haunted eyes, kept me rooted there. I knew, somehow, that this was bigger than Mike, bigger than me, and it was about to change everything. I reached out, preparing to open the door, when I suddenly heard the faintest sound from inside. Not a voice, not a cry, but a single, rhythmic tapping. The faint tap-tap-tap coming from behind the door sounded mechanical, almost deliberate, but incredibly soft. It wasn't a distress signal, or at least, not the kind I recognized. It was too steady, too rhythmic. I gently pressed my ear against the wood, holding my breath again. It was definitely Sarah's room. I could smell that same musky perfume, but now mixed with something else, something metallic, like old pennies, or maybe just the dusty heat of the cramped attic room. I reached for the doorknob, the metal cold and slick under my palm. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, wondering if I should try to whisper her name. But the instruction was clear, "Don't knock." I took a slow breath and turned the knob, moving it with agonizing slowness to prevent the latch from clicking. The door swung inward maybe 6 inches. The light inside was dimmer than I expected. It was just a single lamp, draped with a thin scarf, casting deep, unsettling shadows across the small space. Sarah was sitting on the floor, leaning back against the wall next to a tiny, cluttered desk. She wasn't crying, she wasn't hurt, and she didn't look scared. She looked focused, intensified. She didn't look up immediately. Her attention was completely fixed on the desk in front of her. Spread out across the surface, illuminated by the warm, dim light, was a sprawling mess of papers, diagrams, and small, silvery objects I couldn't quite make out. I whispered, "Sarah, what's going on?" She finally lifted her head, and when she saw me, her eyes weren't haunted this time. They were wide and electric, burning with an energy I hadn't seen before. A small, tight smile touched her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. It looked like the smile of someone who had just finished running a marathon or discovered something huge, something dangerous. "You came," she murmured, her voice thin and dry, like old parchment. She gestured toward the room, then back to the door, a silent instruction to close it. I stepped inside and carefully nudged the door shut, making sure it didn't latch. I looked around the room, taking in the scene. The tap-tap-tap noise was louder now. I traced it to her hands. Sarah wasn't just sitting there. She was holding a tiny, specialized tool, like a miniature screwdriver, and she was meticulously working on one of the silvery objects on the desk. "I need you to look at this," she said, her voice dropping lower, full of a strange urgency. She pushed a tattered, old photograph toward me with her foot. It was of an ancient-looking man, and the picture was torn right down the middle. "He's been watching me," she whispered, her eyes flickering toward the single window. "He knows I have the key. And now, You know I have it too. I looked from the photo, to the silvery objects, to her intense face. What key? Who was watching? I felt a cold surge of certainty that this wasn't just some artistic project gone wrong. This was paranoia, or something much, much worse. Before I could even ask what the photograph meant, she grabbed my arm and pulled me close. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Listen to me, she breathed, her face inches from mine, her intense, electric eyes locking onto mine. Mike thinks I'm designing a new logo. He has no idea. You can't tell him anything. If you do, they'll know. They'll know that the only thing separating me from finishing this is this one final wire. She pointed a shaky finger at a tiny, exposed coil on the silvery object. And I don't know how to disconnect it without setting the whole thing off. I noticed you provided a section of the story intended for prompt 4 in your last turn, which I had already completed in the previous step. It seems you may have accidentally pasted an earlier section. Based on the flow, we have just completed prompt 5. The twist, where the true danger, the retrieval team, has arrived. Sarah has revealed the bomb was a test, a neural stress scanner, and she has shoved a smoke canister into my hand, ordering me to escape through the window as the door splinters. Now, I will move directly to prompt 6, the climax. This is the peak of the action and emotional tension. Describe the final, chaotic confrontation and the main character's desperate move to survive. Resolve the immediate danger, but leave the long-term emotional damage and confusion for the resolution. End this section with a physical escape that leaves the viewer breathless. The door splintered with a sound like a gunshot, and a heavy, boot-clad foot slammed into the gap, ripping the wood around the latch. I didn't hesitate. Sarah's genuine terror had overwritten the manufactured fear in my brain. Whoever was coming through that door was not part of the game. This was deadly. Go. Get down, Sarah yelled, throwing her own body against the door, buying me maybe 2 seconds. I ran to the tiny attic window. It was latched tight, dusty, and probably hasn't been opened in a decade. I didn't bother with the latch. I grabbed the chair Sarah had been sitting on and smashed the window pane in one desperate, violent move. The glass exploded outward, raining down onto the porch roof below. The force behind the door suddenly overcame Sarah. It burst inward, hitting the wall with a deafening crash. 2 figures, large and dressed entirely in black tactical gear, streamed into the room. They weren't police. They weren't robbers. They looked like something out of a paramilitary training video, moving with practiced, cold efficiency. The second they saw Sarah, they stopped. Subject is secured. Secure the device. One of them barked into a microphone hidden near his neck. Sarah was still screaming, but not at them. She was screaming at me. The canister. Now, I fumbled with the silver device she'd given me. It was slick with my own nervous sweat. I ripped the pin from the top and threw it hard toward the center of the room, right at the tactical figures. It hissed once, then erupted in a thick, blinding white smoke that instantly choked the air. The agents coughed, momentarily stunned and blinded, their disciplined formation dissolving into chaos. One of them immediately started firing something, not a gun, but maybe a specialized net gun. I saw a tangle of dark mesh snagging the corner of the ceiling. This was my only chance. I threw myself headfirst through the jagged window frame, not caring about the cutting glass. I landed hard on the steep, shingled porch roof below, the air knocked from my lungs. I scrabbled for purchase, the shingles rough beneath my hands, desperately trying not to slide. I could hear the muffled shouts and the sounds of struggle and breaking objects from the attic window above me, now obscured by the billowing white smoke. Mike. The thought hit me like a physical blow. He was asleep, just 1 floor down. If the agents were here, if they were fighting, if they had guns, I couldn't go back in. I was already outside, and I knew if I went through the house, I'd lead them straight to Mike. I looked down. The porch roof ended about 12 feet above the lawn. It was a stupid, reckless jump, but the sound of the agents kicking the shattered window frame told me they were already scrambling onto the roof behind me. I gripped the canister, which was still smoking faintly, took a deep breath of the cold night air, and leaped out into the darkness. I landed awkwardly, rolling hard across the wet grass, the impact stinging through my clothes. I scrambled to my feet, my legs burning, and didn't look back at the dark silhouette of the house. I just ran, across the yard, vaulting over the low hedge, and sprinting down the dark, quiet street, the silence of the suburb now screaming at me. I ran until my lungs burned, until I was 3 blocks away, stopping only when I reached the blinding light of an all-night gas station. I leaned against a concrete pillar, fighting for air, the taste of dust and adrenaline thick in my throat. I looked back at the direction of the house, quiet, dark, perfectly normal. I was safe, but Sarah was still back there, and I was holding a smoking canister. And I knew, with a terrible, sinking finality, that whatever Mike's sister was involved in, I was now inextricably part of it, and I was totally, horrifyingly alone. I was bent over, gripping my knees, trying to catch my breath at the gas station. My body was shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone I'd pulled from my pocket. I needed to call the police, but the thought of telling them about the Department of Defense document, the neural scanner, and the tactical team felt utterly impossible. Before I could dial, my phone buzzed again. It wasn't Sarah's number. It was Mike. I froze. Mike was supposed to be asleep, snoring soundly, safe. How could he be texting me? I opened the message, expecting a frantic, confused question about the noise. But the text wasn't a question at all. It was a single, simple, precomposed sentence, the kind of professional message you only send when you're sure of your objective. It read, "She always was sloppy. Now that you've secured the data, meet me at the warehouse at 3 a.m. My heart stuttered. The realization hit me with the force of a wrecking ball. Mike wasn't asleep. Mike wasn't the oblivious roommate. He wasn't the concerned brother. He hadn't been shielding Sarah. He'd been running the test. The whole time, the real puppet master, the one who orchestrated the late-night text, the one who knew about my gaming skills, was my best friend. I looked at the message, then back toward the dark street where the house stood. I had just risked my life for a test run by my roommate, who was now expecting me, not Sarah, to complete the mission he had already failed. And I had his sister's life on my conscience. I had to know what was in that warehouse, and I had to find out what Mike had done to Sarah. I felt a cold, terrifying clarity wash over the shock. The agents weren't looking for Sarah. They were looking for the device, and I had just been the last part of Mike's twisted extraction plan. The canister in my hand, it didn't contain smoke. It contained the crucial data Sarah had collected, or perhaps the device itself, disguised as a smoke bomb. I had to play along. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, my muscles still shaking from the jump. The warehouse Mike mentioned was the abandoned printing press, the same one Sarah had claimed the timer was set to trigger. I walked the final blocks downtown, every shadow seeming to jump at me. When I reached the warehouse district, the air was heavy with the smell of old paper and neglect. The warehouse was massive, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. I found a gap in the fence, exactly where Mike would have expected a rendezvous, and slipped through. The door to the loading dock was ajar. I pushed it open and stepped into a vast, echoing space lit only by high-up security lights. The place was full of stacked wooden crates and covered machinery. "You're late," a voice echoed from the gloom. Mike stepped out from behind a tower of crates. He wasn't wearing his usual worn t-shirt. He was in a perfectly tailored dark suit, looking like a different person entirely. Older, sharper, and utterly ruthless. "Where is she, Mike?" I demanded, my voice raw. He gave me a dismissive wave. "Sarah is back at the house, dealing with the cleanup. She failed, spectacularly. Too much emotion, too many mistakes. We had to extract the neural scanner data quickly. That's what you're holding." He nodded at the canister. "The retrieval team was just a test of your loyalty. You chose the mission over your emotional attachment to her. Good job. Now hand it over." He reached out his hand, but I didn't move. "You put your own sister in danger?" Mike shrugged, a gesture of chilling indifference. "Sarah has been unstable for years. She has access to our family's proprietary tech. That Department of Defense diagram was hers, a project she stole. She's a liability. We needed someone with your skills, calm, precise, technically capable, to neutralize her involvement and recover the device. You were our contingency." I looked down at the canister, then back at Mike's smug, transformed face. This was it, the moment of truth. "Sorry, Mike," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "I may be technically capable, but I'm not that calm." I didn't throw the canister at him. I slammed it down onto the concrete floor at my feet and kicked it with all my strength. It didn't explode. It shattered, releasing not just the data device, but a wave of thick, green tear gas that instantly engulfed the entire loading bay. Mike screamed, clutching his eyes, his voice dissolving into a choking cough. I had switched the contents of the canister with something Sarah had left on her desk, a self-defense device she'd built years ago. As Mike stumbled and choked in the blinding gas, I grabbed the fallen device, the real neural scanner, and sprinted back out through the loading dock. I knew I couldn't trust Mike, and I definitely couldn't trust Sarah, but I had the key piece of evidence. I ran until I hit the edge of the city, my eyes stinging, and then stopped under a buzzing street lamp. I opened the scanner device. I had to know what was inside. Was it data about me? Or something else? I managed to activate the viewing screen. It showed a single, encrypted file labeled Project Cassandra, Phase 1 debrief, but the final shock wasn't the project name. As I looked up from the screen, I saw a familiar face emerge from the shadows across the street. Not Mike, and not a tactical agent. It was the old man from the torn photograph Sarah had shown me. He was standing perfectly still, watching me, his hands deep in his pockets. And he was smiling, a slow, patient, terrible smile. He wasn't watching Sarah. He was watching the successful recruit. Me. I didn't run this time. I couldn't. The old man just stood there, silently, under the yellow streetlight. He didn't chase, didn't call out, didn't even move. He was a symbol of the terrible realization I was finally facing. I hadn't escaped anything. I had been recruited. The entire ordeal, from the cryptic text to the final leap, was my initiation. Sarah had failed the test because she was too emotional. Mike had administered the test because he was too cold. I was the perfect balance they were looking for. I stared at the old man, who was now nodding slowly, a sign of terrible, quiet approval. Then, he simply melted back into the shadows of the alley, leaving me alone with the humming neural scanner in my hand and the ringing silence of the pre-dawn city. I never went back to that house. I knew Mike would be waiting, furious and exposed, and I knew the old man, my new handler, was already watching my next move. I found an empty motel room a few towns over and spent the next week dissecting the scanner, not for data about Project Cassandra, but for answers about Sarah. The scanner was primarily focused on measuring my response, yes, but buried deep in the metadata were video files. Not of me, but of Sarah. She wasn't just Mike's unstable sister. She was the original inventor of the neural scanner, the true genius behind the tech Mike was trying to steal for his organization. She was the one who blew the whistle on the project. Mike hadn't been testing me to see if I was worthy of joining him. He was testing me to see if I was worthy of her. The final video file was a shaky, silent recording taken just before I arrived in the attic. Sarah was looking directly into the scanner's lens, a genuine, sad smile on her face. She held up her phone and pointed to the screen, showing the text she was about to send me. Then she mouthing two words, "Tell Mike." The real twist wasn't Mike setting me up, it was Sarah warning me. She knew she was compromised and that Mike was coming. She reached out to me, the quiet roommate, not because I was the target, but because she saw me as the only person outside of their organization who had the skills and the morality to finish what she started. By choosing the mission over her, I had accidentally proven to Mike that I was disposable, but I had also proven to Sarah that I was competent. The final question I had was about Sarah's safety. After the gas attack, I assumed she was taken away by Mike's agents. But a week later, I got another anonymous text. Just one word, accompanied by a picture. Free. The picture was a grainy shot of a coastal town, and in the corner, almost hidden, was a distinctive mural of an ocean wave, a signature piece of street art I knew Sarah had designed years ago. She had escaped. She was safe, and she was sending a signal. Mike is still out there, running his secret organization, and the old man is still watching. I know I can't live a normal life anymore. I carry a constant awareness that my decisions are being judged, that I am officially in the game. But knowing the truth, that Sarah didn't use me, but trusted me to protect her work and expose Mike's ruthlessness, gives me a purpose. I traded a quiet life for one of constant looking over my shoulder, but I'm no longer just Mike's roommate. I'm Sarah's contingency plan. I have the data, I know the players, and I know what they're capable of. She dared me to dream big, not about a career, but about what I was willing to fight for. And now, those dreams, or nightmares, have become very real. I just have one question for you. Now that I have the data, what should I do with Project Cassandra?